See if it's halfway out. Dude, that is going to stay there forever.
I have slept at the truck stop, or no, the gas station in Convergent.
Just so you know, this is being broadcast now.
Oh, hi. I have slept at the gas station in Convergent like 20 times.
Full out sleep in the car. Just because you get so tired.
Yeah, I don't want to die.
All right, let's get started here. There, hopefully some people will join. I just posted it to Twitter and sent it to the list.
So it's live, but I may not have an audience for my confessions.
But it'll be archived, so
Oh,
yes, you will.
awesome.
You'll have a permanent record.
Just don't say who I am.
So,
It's fine.
part of the, yeah, exactly. You can still say anonymous, just be careful.
All right, so there's a few people in the room, hopefully more online. Hart is going to be talking about the problem solution interviews. Hart has a startup of his own, Theraspecs. He went through the Seed Spot program and now runs a pretty successful eyewear company and does consulting for Adobe and basically applying these same concepts for them and other people, right? So
That's right. Yeah, I'll talk a little about that in a minute.
Right.
So,
cool, awesome, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so I think the simplest way to describe this is that I love this cartoon. And it has a bunch of frames in it, about what actually happened, customer design, what somebody did. I first saw this, I think it was the third day I was working out of college, and I was working for a software company. This was hanging on the wall of one of the engineer's office. And I've since seen it basically everywhere I've ever worked with engineers. Like, this has come up somewhere. And in fact, I went back and tried. Actually, this is my favorite with that document. It's just a shadow of the tree. I actually went back because I wanted to use this in my presentation, so I wanted to find original authorship. And so I tried to, and I went further and further back. I actually only could find stuff that referenced a previous version, right? All the way back to the earliest reference I could find for it was about 1981. And so this cartoon has been floating around, and this is the punchline. This cartoon has been floating around for so long, I started to become convinced that it was like the Roman aqueduct engineers had this hanging on the walls. Like, it's just a truism, apparently. And I think it's really instructive, especially as a product guy myself, what the customer described and what the customer actually wanted, right? Everything else is just filler to me. But why does this happen? Why does this happen all the time? And I was a product manager, and I was trying to teach other product managers, and as I started my own company, I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out in particular. In the cartoon, before we move on, I always thought that this one was just an example of the customer doesn't really know what they want. I mean, what the hell is that for, right? I mean, you can't swing on it, you can't climb it, it's not actually a... and it was this realization, though, recently, I actually saw this online maybe a year ago, and it changed my idea a lot, because what they wanted was a tire swing, and what we heard was a tier swing, and it's almost the right thing, but it's completely wrong. And so that's the punchline. So how do we avoid this? How do we raise our odds to make this not happen in the future? Sean was talking a little bit about this. So my company is Theraspecs, and we manufacture and sell precision-tuned eyewear that help with migraines, headaches, eye strain, and other issues that can be triggered or worsened by light. Before that, I was a product manager for a long time. I studied physics in college and thought I was a good physicist for a while, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't really work for me. So I got a job. It was the 90s, and so I got a job in tech support for a software company because that's the mailroom of the 90s. And that company, I became product manager there, and that company eventually was bought by Adobe, and I ran product management for a few groups there before moving and going back to the entrepreneurial startup world. Isotope is basically an MIT spin-out. Their first corporate address was literally their dorm room at MIT. And I moved back to Phoenix for some personal reasons before starting Theraspecs, but the way I look at it is like, this is what gets me out of bed. Like, this being my customer, I really do get fired up by the moment where I see the light in the eyes of somebody that I've built something that's really going to change their world. But that is the reaction, I mean, not for me, of course. No, of course. Like, I've shipped clunkers, right? Things that just didn't perform anywhere near like we wanted to, as well as things that blew it out of the park. And the level of investment we made to make the thing had zero correlation on what reaction we got from our customer. And so this is where, in a bigger group, I run some exercises. And I just don't think it's going to be fun, right, for this. But a couple of the examples here are, just to ask one of the questions, think of it, like consider the letter K in the English language. Is the letter K more likely to appear as the first or third letter of an English word, and by how much?
Third?
Yeah, first position in a word,
Yeah.
or the third position in a word.
I'd say first.
I'd say first.
Yeah. By how much? Like, do you think it's 2, 3, 5, 10 times as likely to be in the first? You know, like if you took all the English and counted it up.
30% of the time, maybe.
I'd say it's
Like
5,
as a multiple compared to
5
the third.
times more likely.
5 times more likely in the
Yeah.
first. Does that?
Is that?
I'm going for like 10 or 26.
Yeah.
Something like
Okay.
that.
But you definitely think that it appears many times more in the first position of a word than the third, right? And this is one of the things we use. It's actually 3 times as likely to be the third letter of an English word. And this is really surprising because it's really easy for us to think of words that start with K, right? Kite, kill, kid. Right? It's really hard to think about the words where K is the third letter, acknowledge.
Acknowledge is the only one I
Right.
thought. Yeah.
Awkward.
That's what I thought.
Right. And this is availability bias. Right? We can easily remember words that start with K, and so we think that there are more of them. And there are a whole bunch of things like this. One of the things that I do here with a bigger group is, you see this number series 2, 4, 6. I have a simple rule that I use to generate this number series, and it's your job, if we really ran this thing, to figure out what my rule is. And the way you can do this is you propose any series of numbers that you want, and I will tell you whether or not that series of numbers fits my rule or not. And you can do that as many times as you want until you know my rule. And in a great crowd, I mean, it takes about 20 minutes to run in a crowd. And what I do is I walk around, and almost everybody's first series is 8, 10, 12. And then they do, well, they do other like 20, 22, 24, right? All these different things. They get clever. They do -5, -3, -1. And all of these are yeses. Yes, that fits my rule. Yes, that fits my rule. Yes, that fits my rule. And I would say that maybe 60% of the time, the class settles on my rule being add 2. The trick is that almost nobody, the only people who get my rule right have maybe 12, at least 10 or 12 different hypotheses in this column, and half of them are no's. They get at least 5 or 6 no answers. Because my rule is actually any series of 3 ascending numbers. And you can go through this, but as long as you're only asking questions which confirm what you think is true, you will continue to think that you are right. And so this is an exercise that I use all the time, because this is exactly what happens with anybody who's starting a new company, anybody who has a new venture, anybody who has a new idea, is you fall prey to confirmation bias. And I really love the fact that Wikipedia has a list of cognitive biases on it. And while it's not the like end-all be-all of psychological definitions of these things, it is awesome reading. And it's kind of scary too, because you realize that our brains don't really work like we do. I talk about availability bias. This is the same thing that happens when I'm thinking about buying a car and all of a sudden I see that car everywhere. There aren't actually more of that car on the road, and yet I'm noticing it. The real insidious bit about this is if it's easily remembered by us, we're more likely to think it's true. So we actually will assign more factual weight to it just because we remember it. That could be the last customer we talked to. It could be because I'm in a crowd. That's what happens in Silicon Valley all the time, is that it's a monoculture, and so people are always saying the same thing. It's what I'm aware of, and so I think it's important. I mean, you know, not for everybody in all of Silicon Valley, but I think that's a classic case of what's going on with that. But you also have things like cheerleader bias. When I'm already in a group, I'll think that group is more likely to be right. And confirmation bias is a really scary one, because it's not just that I'm more likely to think something I hear is true if it agrees with what I already believe. I will actually not hear data that disagrees with what I already believe. So if I believe that left-handed people are more creative, when I meet left-handed people, I'm more likely to notice they're creative. If I meet a creative person, an artist who's left-handed, I'm likely to notice it. But if I meet an artist who's right-handed, I'm likely to not notice their handedness. Like, it doesn't enter my, like, it's just not a data point. I didn't notice it. And this is what's happening all the time. And our brains are doing this all the time. How many animals of each type did Moses take on the ark?
2.
It's none. It's Noah. Right? But Moses fits the biblical theme. And so we immediately say 2, right? And it takes a while to even figure. I was just talking about cognitive bias, and 2 leaps to mind. And so this is the other thing that happens is that something that already fits the model we have, we don't even know that we made a decision about that model. If I had said how many animals of each type did George Bush take on the Ark, you know it's wrong. It's a joke. It's a terrible joke. It's not funny, but it's like it's a part of your brain that responds to jokes. Responds.
So did you say Moses?
I did.
I heard Noah. That's what's.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess it's on the video. But
and so yeah, you can go back and check it. This comes from like the Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, which really must have pissed off the economist because he's a psychologist. He basically invented behavioral economics, right? Because you've noticed that economics believes that all humans are rational actors, and they're not. Right? So what he describes is the brain actually has 2 thinking systems. System 1, as he calls it, is the fast, effortless pattern matching system. And this is the way that we can walk into a room and know what the mood of the room is, whatever it's going on. It's also how we can like walk and talk and drive our car for 30 minutes. Because if you actually had to think, okay, I'm going to engage this muscle, like we couldn't actually do anything, right? This is system 1. System 2 is our slow, logical, effortful system, how we can make pro-con lists, do math problems, whatever it is. And system 2 is what we think of as ourselves, right? This is our conscious self. The trick is, the system 1 runs the show. We only engage system 2 when system 1 tells it to. So either the George Bush example, something throws a rod, and you're like, wait, that doesn't fit the pattern. What's the, oh, it's George Bush is in a biblical thing. Like, this is how most humor works, right? You fool system 1's expectations. The other way is system 1 sees a pattern, is like, oh, that's a calculus problem, I need system 2, right? It fits the pattern that it knows it needs system 2 for. So the entire thing we're talking about in all of this is consciously engaging system 2, making every pattern we see for our company system 2. Like, do we actually need to look at this thing? And that's how new products today happen, right? We've got this innovator who thinks, hey, I got this idea, I see this thing going out there and these people, and I got this idea, right? I could make this thing. This thing would totally make those people happy. And, I could probably make some money, right? Like, there's an opportunity here. So I go, and the innovator just goes out and says to the people, hey, I got this idea for this thing. And they say, oh, that sounds cool. Now the innovator's really excited, right? And so the innovator puts on their best clothes because the money is over with these people, right? And so they go out and they tell these people about all the reasons why the innovator should have their money so they can solve this problem for the customer, and they get the money, and yay, success! Except is it really, we all know that that's not actually what happens. And the reason is because this is predicated on the idea that these people seeing this information have an insight about these people actually behaving as they anticipate. And the truth is that those people don't even know how they're going to behave. People are terrible predictors of future behavior. Just look at gym memberships. And that's people spending their own money predicting whether or not they will follow through on their action, right? So how do we do this? And this is where Steve Blank and Eric Ries really came in four steps to the epiphany, lean startup. And the way Eric described it is you got some ideas and you build some product, you put that product in the market, and you measure how people use it. You get data, you learn from that, and around you go. And each time you go, you stop for a second. You say, hey, did I learn something that I should pivot on? My big problem with this is this box, build product, which made a ton of sense for Eric's circumstance. But building a product is almost always the most expensive thing you can possibly do to learn. So I like going back to the original language, is you have hypotheses. And what you're going to build is experiments, and eventually that experiment will actually be a product. But not until that's the cheapest thing you can do, right, to actually do that. And the mantra here that Blank introduced is there are no facts inside the building. There can only be hypotheses. To get an actual fact, we have to leave the building physically or metaphorically and engage with a customer. There may be constraints, right? But you got to get outside the building. By the way, when I'm talking to bigger companies, so the CEO, they're in the building, their hypothesis gets validated first, right? But it's still a hypothesis, and just keeping that one thing in mind really changes the way teams engage. The most common objection is the Henry Ford quote. You guys all seen this?
Yep.
Also researched, he never said it, which I find fascinating. He also almost went out of business because GM started making cars in colors. Go figure. And he was steadfast on the black thing. But it's true, right? You can't just go out and say what do you want. Customers don't know, they like by definition. So what we're going to do is we're not going to ask, we're going to find out. And I go through a few steps here. They're iterative, like I have to present them linearly, but you always bounce around here. My first step is actually start with why. Simon Sinek. People buy why you do things, not what they do. Lots of nods, so I won't go through that. I talk about it's not about the money, right? Money is the result of your why. But my example is, right, Hugh uses Apple as a good way to say, Dell might say, we build great computers using a process of, by combining high value parts at low costs so that you can get your work done, right? Apple says we believe in challenging the status quo in everything we do. We do that through great design so that technology is accessible to everybody. We just have to make computers. We want to buy one. And everybody's like, oh, well, it's immediately more engaging. What I do is I just use this as an example for Dell's computer business. If Dell just did the exact same thing but said it as, we believe everybody deserves to have access to the tools of productivity. So we combine great technology at affordable prices so that you can get your work done. You want to buy one? It's the exact same message, but you just start with why. And this is where I get to, when I'm working with especially entrepreneurs, but also teams that are in big companies that are doing what they do because they're told to. There's getting connected back to what human problem we're solving is the single greatest indicator I have found of whether or not somebody's going to actually be able to follow through what they're doing. This keeps flipping back and forth. Central has 0 viewers. I don't know if somebody joined us.
Yeah, it's Brett Farr.
Oh,
What's up, Brett?
Hey, Brett.
Hey, not sure if you can hear, but how you guys doing?
So then we get into the value propositions. That was step 0. I'm really a big fan lately of the value proposition canvas. This is another one of Osterwalder, who did the original business model canvas, but value proposition design, I think, is the single best book on all this stuff. Like, it's not the end-all be-all, but if you're only gonna have one book, that's the one. And this really goes to, innovators always think about product and service first. The problem with this, the analogy I use is you have this idea for the Band-Aid, you go out and you say, hey, we got this idea, do you have a skinned knee? People say, yeah, I totally got a skinned knee. Does that hurt? Yeah. Would you buy this Band-Aid? Absolutely. Because it's bleeding all over my sock and everything. We mailed to build a Band-Aid and nobody's buying it. And it's because we didn't ask them anything about the fact that they actually needed crutches, and we never found out. So we went out and we asked them about our Band-Aid, right? And so we always want to start over here in the customer job. This is the idea going back 100 years. I don't know the guy's name, but he said customers don't want to buy a half-inch drill. They want to buy a half-inch hole. They want to buy the drill in the hole. My favorite story of this is actually from Clayton Christensen about the milkshakes. You guys heard this?
Yeah.
So fast food company wanted to sell more milkshakes. They did all the standard market research stuff, and nothing made a difference. So Christensen, I think it was Christensen's group, actually went and tried to figure out what job the milkshake does for the customer, which is this sort of weird framing of the question. But they went and they observed, the first thing they did is they observed everybody who bought a milkshake and everything they could write down about who did that. And it turned out they were very surprised because more than 50% of all milkshakes sold in a day are sold before 8 a.m. They're sold to people who are dressed well and drive in and drive out alone. That's weird. So we went back the next day and they want to find out what job the milkshake does. And of course, you can't walk into a customer and say, what job does that milkshake do for you? But this is where we get into how you actually do this. And it's things like questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation that made you buy the milkshake this morning, but you didn't buy the milkshake. What'd you buy and why? Why'd you buy that? And long story short, it turns out that not only is this a breakfast item, but it beats other breakfast items because it's messy. It's not messy. You can hold it in one hand. You can do it as you drive. But the main thing that the people had in common is they all had a long, boring commute. And the milkshake kept them entertained. So the fact that it took 25 minutes to consume the milkshake was a huge part of the value proposition of that milkshake. I hypothesized they had a long, boring commute to a job they didn't want to be in. So it was like their pre-reward for just psyching themselves up to be going to work. And by approaching the customer, not just their pains and the gains, but what job actually has to get done, is the single most useful framing I have found for working with teams on figuring out, do we actually know that people will adopt this thing? Are we actually solving problems for them? Are we actually doing a job for them which is high priority? And
not to mention in that example, I believe it was they added like chunky fruit because they realized like, how can we more keep them entertained?
Exactly.
If that's the purpose.
So they put more like mix-ins in, and they actually started using the normal drink straws, so the milkshake straws, which are smaller.
Right. Yeah.
So it just takes longer to consume the thing, and they sold more.
Yeah.
It was more entertaining. And this is the place where then you need to know what the jobs, pains, gains are for all your segments. So like we're talking today about multi-sided markets and what we're talking about right outside the door about like the user will love it, but what's the pains, gains, and job it's going to do for the buyer or for whoever the stakeholders are. So that's definitely the place to start. And then we need to document the plan. And I would say step back and way back, right? Because this is where we use I'll just skip it. This is just Lean Canvas. But it's all innovators, just like I started over on the left, started the solution. And I have yet to work with a group that failed because they couldn't build what they envisioned building. They spent all their time thinking about the solution. And so the trick here is to step back and actually think about all these things. Well, who is the customer and what do they actually need and how are we going to solve it, how are we going to articulate it and all these things, because it's almost always in something like channel or cost structure that actually is the thing that we actually need to talk about. And the other thing is when I talked about in the learning loop, that pivot, a pivot can be in any one of these boxes. And people, when they read Lean Startup, think it means change the product, but often it doesn't. Often the product is exactly the same as our original idea, but we're going to sell it to something different or like that. So. And then, right, we iterate across this whole thing. And so one of the other things that's a beautiful practice is as you're working to actually figure out, are all these things true? Because these are all the assumptions that we're going to test. Keep all your old canvases because you can go back and look at them and see what you thought was true. And it's an amazing thing when you're in an investor meeting and they say something like, or a stakeholder meeting of any kind, they say, I just don't think that people would, and you say, that's fascinating, because actually that was our hypothesis in week 4. So we did these 2 things, we found out, and this is what happened, and that's why our canvas looks like this now. A totally different conversation. Like, this is what, in organizations, I learned the term, the Hippo Problem, or play the Hippo game. The Hippo is the highest paid person's opinion. And so we're always, in a large organization, asking that person with the bigger paycheck, what do you think? They don't know any better than we do. So you bring some facts, and you've got a gun at the knife fight, right? Opinion on opinion, theirs will always win. Step 3, we got all these assumptions across the whole business model. How do we decide what to actually look for first? So I like the Ash Warrior's problem, solution, product, market, business fit, scale, right? That's the simplest frame that I have seen for this. And for each, you sort of think about, well, of this assumption, is this a scale assumption or is this an assumption about problem, solution, fit? And is it uncertain how risky it is, right? Uncertainty can either be how much we don't know, or I like actually looking at it as how many different possibilities are there for the outcome of this? And risk is how screwed are we if we're wrong, right? And this gives you a pretty good idea of what you're supposed to test first, right? Start with problem solution fit. It doesn't matter if you can't scale something that's not even solving the problem, right? And again, especially with technical founders, they'll be thinking about the scale problems. And so just encouraging that step back. And right, you get the testing order falls out of this. And then we need a hypothesis, and this is probably my favorite of all of this stuff. Because if we just leave the building, we're getting out of the building, but we don't have a hypothesis first, we're just gonna keep gathering data until we're right, until we think we're right. So, and that's where we get into the hypothesis. I think this is the simplest form I've seen for businesses. Simple, repeatable action, something we are actually going to do, and we're predicting some expected measurable customer action. This could be at any level. It's like in your head, this is a terrible hypothesis. It's very vague, so we get very specific. One of the things I love about Osterwalder's new book is the test card, where he actually just breaks this down. Right? The assumption, we believe that, and something on your canvas, to verify that and measure or write if, just really make it straightforward for people who need to get into this for the first time. I've never done this before. This is a great tool. And I've got versions. I edit some of the, to match myself, I don't have hypothesis labeled there. I make this hypothesis part 1 and 2 and that's the assumption, right? Just to really get back to the and then we got the experiments, right? And the key thing for running the actual experiment is that typically this, in all the business graphs we see, is revenue or lines of code or progress towards metrics, but it should really be validated learning. Do we know more today that we validated than we did yesterday? Right? Because what happens is that as you learn more, the risk falls off. And the key corollary to that is we only invest our time, money, energy, effort as that risk falls. And so at the beginning, we're literally spending the least amount of money we can figure out how to do. Right? Here's an assumption. Is it true? What's the cheapest, fastest thing we can do to get some data? Because sometimes just asking 3 people means that, well, now I'm more worried about that assumption than this assumption, right? And you just keep bouncing around your assumptions that are first problem solution assumptions, spending as little as possible. And eventually you're putting your coins in that big bank. And this is, like there's never a big bet moment, ideally. Sometimes there has to be when you're getting investment, but it's the, ideally it's not like, well, now we know enough to commit the $100 million, right? You just continually invest more. And every experiment is additive, so it's also very tempting to build that one giant big experiment to learn everything. And it's much better to make each experiment as small as possible because you'll learn something every time you place one of those new bricks down. So, and what you're ultimately looking for, we were talking about just a minute ago, some kind of behavior like this or indication that this is going to happen. And then for types of experiments, A/B testing, right? It's great. It's what Eric talks about a lot. But it's only great once you're at the point where you actually have a value proposition on a website that you can actually have enough traffic coming to. So it's a very late possibility for this, for experimentation. But anything that you know of that you can use for customer research can be used as an experiment. So interviews, I can talk more about this if we have time, if people are interested.
Actually, I have a question before you go
Yeah.
on. So do you have a method or is it an art in terms of how you prioritize the things to test in a certain order? Like, we know this is a deal killer, therefore we're going to go test this one thing.
Okay, yeah. So first I use that, I break all my assumptions down into the three, is it a problem solution question, is it a product market question, or is it a scale of business question? And I always test in that order, right? So I'm always looking for problem solution. Do I actually understand the customer? And can I even talk to them about things that might solve that problem? But beyond that framework, I use, it's a little more art, right, to figure out what's the high risk thing. What I've used very effectively is I talk to people about, especially if they're spending someone else's money, but what's the gut check level? And I use it as, would I bet my lunch, would I bet my computer, would I bet my vacation, would I bet my car, would I bet my house, would I bet my career, right? And for a company, you have to calibrate that. Like, I would only bet my phone, and like, I'm kind of nervous that I wouldn't actually put that on the line. Well, for some of the companies that's a $100,000 investment, right? But for me, it's literally my phone. I'm an entrepreneur, right? So when I say, so I had to be willing to bet my house because I was betting my house, right? And so getting that sort of calibration and figuring out what that is for you. Yeah. And also, it's like, which one of these things is most important and most scary, right? So I need to figure out, would I bet that's right? And if you're actually an entrepreneur, every one of those is I'm betting my house, right? So would I bet my house that this thing is true? That's the level of threshold you should be having on what those things are. And then it's, which one of these things am I most nervous I'm actually going to lose my house because I'm not right? Go test that. Right? So just connect it viscerally to something.
Gotcha.
Just real quick, some testing types, right? We got interviews. The big thing here is the difference between problem and solution interviews, right? Problem, therapist. So tell me about your day. I mean, literally, walk me through a day in the life of you. Solution interviews, we got this idea. An example here for a hypothesis, because you can't just ask them. So this was one I actually did with a team at Adobe. Well, I didn't do it, but it was done at Adobe. But like asking their customers to describe their workflow, when we just ask that question, they're going to spontaneously describe sharing files between designers as a pain point. Right? All we have to do is say, walk us through your workflow. And so that's the kind of thing, right, where you can say, my hypothesis is that by asking this question in this area, the result is going to be this thing is going to happen. Focus groups, like interviews are good, so get a bunch of customers together. I got one tip for focus groups. Because I can. Right, this is just a hotbed of bias. And this is where actually, Sean, this is where I use innovation games. So this is, are you familiar with the games concept? So the idea is that you bring customers together in a room and they do some structured activity. And so their interaction actually brings out information rather than just being biased. The simplest example is sailboat or speedboat, where customers actually, like, you label an island with the goal that they have, right? This is very high level. This is what we want to be able to do. You have them write Post-it notes on anchors that slow them down from getting to the island, and then wind on things that help them get to the island above the water. And at some point you ask them to rank it, but you got multiple customers, and I often, when I'm doing this particular one, when I get to that point, they can't talk to each other anymore. And so it's amazing, like you can have all sorts of hypotheses about what will be the deepest anchors and all that, and that's great. But it's also amazing as a qualitative standpoint to see one customer walk up to the board, take an anchor, and it's not that big a deal, right? So it's putting it, because we do the further down the anchor is, the more it slows down. So it's like, whatever. And I have another customer like Sarah, like, go back down, right? And that kind of information about, then you can ask those people later about what was going on. That's a very generative game, very divergent. An example of a convergent is buy a feature, where it's a virtual market, you give people funny money, you got a list of things that you might be able to put into a product or a service or offering. And then let's say that all the stuff adds up to $5,000. We only you divide up a fraction of that among everybody. So typically it's about 40% of what it would take to buy everything, but then it's also further divided. And so, because again, it's very interesting to know whether or not recreate lost receipts is bought or not. But watching your customers horse trade with each other in the chat pod or live, if you're doing with Monopoly money, about, well, we don't need that. If we had this, we wouldn't need that because, right?
Yeah.
And so this is the thing where instead of a focus group, and there are a whole bunch of these. John and I both know the guy who started Innovation Games as a company, and I got certified as one of their facilitators for that because I find this to be one of my go-to uses. I actually, the Adobe digital marketing team uses this extensively for their customer advisory boards. So they have CMOs come in and play games like this. Surveys, another classic research, This is not as fair, though. I always blank that one out pretty quickly because it's just be very careful. Most people turn to surveys right away, and it's a golden road to your own bias because you're providing both the questions and the answers, right? This is a great way. I always recommend to reserve surveys for when I have a lot of qualitative data for my research. I just want to make sure it holds quantitatively. Paper prototypes, people skip over this one, but it's amazing what you can get done with paper and you have all the screens drawn out or whatever you're doing and people just touch it, like they interact with it, like they're actually interacting with the system, and you just flip through and find the right one. Oh, we did one recently that was voice activated. We had people talking to 3x5 cards. It was fantastic. My tip from very painful learning here is that you shouldn't actually make them look real. I did a project where we had just pure UI mockups, but our UI designer actually did them, and they looked like finished software. And we had a small but significant problem with our interface, and nobody told us because they think it's done, and they don't want to tell you that you're wrong. And it's like, and so you want to make it look like no work has already gone into this. So now, even if we already have working software, I'll still draw the prototype on a whiteboard, take a picture of it, and take that, because nobody will hesitate to tell you that that's wrong, because they don't think that they're causing you pain. Right? It's part of the, and Sean and I talk about this as well, like when you're doing an interview, I always set it up with, we've got some understanding of your world, but we assume it's not right. So the entire purpose for being here is to figure out what the gap is between what we know and what's real. And so please help us figure out what that gap is. Just give them the social permission.
So I guess along these lines, I would throw in that sometimes the most helpful thing is leaving it partially completed or even repeating info back that is wrong, because it then prompts them to correct you and fill in the blanks. And like you're saying here, like the whole point is not to give them a high fidelity prototype because they think, oh, this is fully baked. I don't want to rock the boat. Right. But like when you give them permission and even encourage them and like implicitly, hey, this is clearly not done. We need your input. The more you can convey that, the better.
Yeah.
And also on this, there's an awesome app I found called Pop, Prototype on Paper.
Yeah.
And you just basically like take a picture of each of those screens on your iPhone and then hot link it together. It's a free app and it's sick. It gives you like a low fidelity iPhone.
I was actually, so just recently I was running a 2-day class for a company back east, and one of them, and one of the activities they needed to do was do a paper prototype. Like I divided them up and they each had a different experiment to run, and it was a hypothetical where everybody else in the class would theoretically be a customer for whatever it was they were working on, right? So they could actually try an experiment. And somebody came in with Pop, and the team that didn't use it did far better because they hadn't thought of every possibility in Pop and linked everything, and so people were touching things that weren't Pop linked. And the team that already had paper would be like, well, this is what would have happened, right? And just did it, right? And so I would say that Pop, I actually love it, but it's not good for your first revs of the paper prototype. Like you have to really feel like this is actually the workflow before you should use it.
So maybe that's a critical thing, is like in that divergent mode where you're just trying to get like things you don't know and get access to that. It's almost like, yeah, just a blank sheet of paper, face-to-face, body language, like nothing more, and then sketch it out.
But even when you're at the point where you're converging on a specific design, early on in the paper prototype process, people will surprise you.
Yeah.
And having that flexibility to just respond and roll with it is and it's just amazing. Like paper is just this amazing. Like we always forget. Like it's great. Like it's just this amazing technology. So a couple case studies. So I like behavior tests, especially as we get later. This is a product called Video Haiku. The hypothesis was that people don't take video on their phone because it's unstructured, right? They don't know what to do with it. And so all we were going to do was make an app where it's a short clip, and they can even have preloaded haiku as the subtitle. What they did is they just put up a page with a sign up for the beta. And a video of how it works and the actual app, but that was just edited in Premiere. Right? This is actually a project that came out of, it didn't end up shipping, although pieces of it ended up in other stuff, from Adobe's internal Kickbox innovation program, where they fund people who have run tests like this, just anybody can. Zappos is a favorite story. Shoes were the classic example of nobody will ever buy that in e-commerce. And so what they did is they went to the local shoe store, took pictures of all the shoes, put them online. When anybody bought the pair, they went to the shoe store and bought them and mailed it to them. But I love Coinstar because they would have this tooling decision to make. It was very expensive, but the barrier to usage of actually seeing the Coinstar machines in the marketing, going home, getting that 50-pound bucket of change from your garage, going back to the grocery store and dumping it in, it's actually a huge friction point. And so what they did is they, to make sure people would actually do it, they built a box out of plywood. They put an LCD on the outside. They had a local vinyl company wrap it in vinyl. They bought a funnel and a normal digital change counter, and a dude sat on a stool in a box, right, in the grocery store. And people would dump their change in, and he would look at the change counter and count out the money and put it out the slot. And this is the thing to inspire. Like, you don't have, like, I have yet to work with a team where like, well, the only thing we could ever do to learn that is to build it. I think that's not true, right? And eventually it is. It's the most cost-effective thing to do. But this is about getting measured behavior over predictive behavior, which is what we're looking for all the way along. So even if I'm interviewing somebody, if I want to know whether or not they're likely to be a luxury car buyer, I don't say, well, what car are you planning on buying? They have no idea. But I try to think of maybe an analogous situation. What's the last major purchase you made? Oh, a refrigerator. Interesting. Well, what did you buy? Oh, a Sub-Zero. That's a really nice refrigerator. Why did you buy it? And if they say, well, because it's a Sub-Zero and it looks good, and it's like, yeah, they're probably a luxury car type buyer. If they say, well, I'm a professional chef and I need the absolute technical, then you don't know that that's actually an indication of what they're going to buy, right? Like, why did they buy it? It's always, why is much more important than what. My example with this is actually Theraspecs. So I had already done interviews with lots of people. My wife has chronic migraine. This is how this got started. So I knew they worked, right? I had done surveys. I had done prototype tests. I'd actually had, like, here, try these on. Right? I had sent them out to some people. But what I didn't know was, does somebody have to talk to Hart and try it before they even consider that this thing is a thing? And so I built a website. And this is actually not the real one because I didn't take a screenshot of it at the time. So I wasn't using Theraspecs as branding. But right, it's a very short, this is my value proposition. These are my 3 bullet points. These are 2 quotes. They're real quotes. Like I always emphasize, don't lie. Never pretend that you have something you don't. These are actually 2 people who tested it, and they actually said these things without me telling them to say them. And at the bottom of the page, I had a picture of the Theraspecs. By this point, by the way, this is literally the only pair I had in my possession. I had built more, but I had sent them out to testers, right, to validate. And this buy button with a price. Now, if they click the buy button, they got a, we're in beta. I don't remember the wording I used, but enter your email address, be happy. Like I didn't, like this other thing is like, don't take their money for something you can't deliver. And then I ran Google Ads, a bunch of different keywords and ad variations is a big part of the test as well, what people actually respond to. And I had a burst of visitors of relevant traffic, and they converted, right? They converted in this idea of just clicking this buy button, and I didn't know about in-cart fall-off and a whole bunch of things I learned about e-commerce later. But this is when I said, this is going to work. But I had another big concern, which is that this is the customer, but I have a multi-sided market here. I can't be doing this if the doctors are telling their patients that this is bullshit. And so I was thinking about the doctors and how could I test this, because this is really hard. Like dialing doctors is super expensive. And so what I found was that there's the American Headache Society, which is the subspecialty of neurology mostly that deals with headache medicine. And I knew that what I would want to do eventually is exhibit there at their symposium. They have a pretty good like application form where you actually have to explain, if you're a first-time exhibitor, what you are, quote the research from peer-reviewed journals, and so on. And I thought, well, if they take the application, if they say I can exhibit, like I don't actually have to pay before I apply. So I applied, right? And the committee said, yeah, you totally exhibit for the American Headache Society. I was like, okay, well now I'm moving forward. Right? Again, like not the ultimate fidelity test, but it was enough to know. And it's true that we go to the American Headache Society meetings, and I'm a dude who can talk about the product and I can talk about the research, and that's enough. Like we have these great conversations with the doctors. And so the key takeaway here, right, is that the right thing is not a binary problem. 80% right is way more than 20% wrong, because you'll be overcoming that 20% or 10% or 5% for the rest of the time that you're actually going to do that. Smell it, right? And so it's not that people could never make great stuff before they did this process. This is only about using everything we've learned to raise your odds, because we can't just look at the two guys in the garage and say, well, we're just going to do that, because we don't see all of the failure cases. It's another cognitive bias. We don't see what we can't see, literally. And so really the only way that you can say that particular thing is that they were lucky. And luck is a terrible business model, right? And so we're trying to avoid that. For people who are in other organizations, there are a few dangers I would say about, like if you already have a fixed schedule, if somebody already given you a fixed scope, if you have some guru in your company, either a boss or somebody who already knows, like, and they're the ones who are going to make the calls, and if you don't have, the people doing the actual experiments don't have the authority to actually make that pivot decision, you can't do this. I've lightened on the fixed schedule part, because if you're a really good, high-functioning, agile development team, you can say, we're going to deliver something of value on this date. We just can't tell you what it is, right? And that's totally legit, but like that's I think the minority of organizations right now, although I've worked with several that can absolutely do that. 6 months from now, we will have something badass for you to show on stage at this event. We're going to go find out what it is. Right?
That's awesome.
And so, it's get out of the building, right? Get out and do this kind of stuff.
Hart, can you, I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, but can you talk about when you do the interviews, because something I remember from a talk that you did before was how it's critical that if you're going to combine the problem solution interview in the same physical setting, that you at least decouple them and ensure that you talk about the problem first. I don't know if you have those.
Yeah, let me see if I've got, I always keep some of this stuff in my pen.
There you go.
Yeah, so this is some of it. So first, this is the prepare ahead of time, what to listen for, general tips, but it's I don't know if I have them combined in this deck. The idea is that you always need to talk about them, their goals, their work, their challenges before you've ever shown them anything. Like you can never go back and find out about those things if you haven't.
Right,
so you're going to
tainted the sample.
Exactly. And so if you haven't done this, the best way to look at this is that if you're going to do it in one interview, you go up through this point as the problem part of the structure, and then you don't do the thank you now. You then come in and you come in with something like after you've finished the key challenges, your best understanding and gotten their feedback. Mm-hmm. Then you say, okay, well, this is what we're thinking about actually doing, and I actually use it as a summary of the marketing message, and then describe the solution as a paper prototype. And then, because you're doing validation, not sales, actually be explicit about its limitations and anything that you can do to make them make the trade-offs. So like, this is everything we're going to do in V1, and these are all the things that we're going to plan on doing in V2. What would you bring into V1, and what would you swap out to get it? Or there's a lighter version of buy a feature, which is the $100 R&D test. People have to, spend their money on stuff depending on how robust they want it to be. Anyway, this is the basic idea, right? You get through this. This is from the Chronic Life thing, but some way to get them to indicate their actual enthusiasm But the key here is both that you've talked about their problems in their life before you get to talk about the solution, and also that after you describe the solution, you actually describe its limitations. It's only available on this platform. It'll only do this. I actually, in some of my presentations for this stuff, will say, this is what this would be good for, and right next to it on the list, this is what it's not good for. And I put everything that I can think that somebody might think this thing is for, that it's not, right? That you should buy something else and just put it out there and say, is that going to be a problem? Like, does that change your opinion? Because at this stage, I'd rather know that they're not thinking, when I get to selling, I'm just going to sell it. But at this stage, I want to know, is it actually what they think? Because that's one of the ways to find out. Are they enthusiastic about what you're actually pitching? Because this other thing is that people will sort of project themselves and think that you meant something radically different than what you actually did.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I see this across the board with all the seed spot companies, particularly, that they're keen to get the interviews, and they finally land some interviews, but then they're tainting the conversations by injecting their theorized solution at the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think this is so critical.
Yeah, it's the key bit, right? And this is the, you know, when I talk to folks, like up there, right? That's the hypothesis. You're not selling. Don't ask ice cream questions. Do you like ice cream?
Yeah.
It's like you don't learn anything,
Yeah.
right? But like asking about what you when you want to treat, what do you buy, and what's the last like that's the kind of stuff you should be asking. I get psyched to hear what you don't want to hear, because if your response is if they tell you something you didn't want to hear and your response is like you're dead, like that's the end of the interview. But if your response is that's fascinating, could you tell me more about that? There, you got them engaged. Just remember, like, because I didn't waste a year of my life doing that. You know, and then they're reflect and repeat customer. Yeah, so about the rest of that stuff. So.
Yeah, I guess to that one, I would just add that hack about sometimes misrepeating data is actually a really interesting hack to get people to be like, oh no, that's not what I didn't say that. I meant blah blah blah, because they'll elaborate on what.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's like I think one of my tricks was that I put somewhere in here is basically it's like the classic journalist trick, which is ask a question and then shut up. And they'll answer it, and then you just look at them expectantly, and it's really super uncomfortable, and so they'll eventually start talking again, and you'll get to what you actually want out of it. It's key for the interview stuff.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Do we have anyone?
Yeah,
I don't think we have anyone on the hang at this point. Cool. All right, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely.